What I want to talk about today and demo is using these Banksia pods. Can you go to the overhead camera, Ray? These Banksia pods are awesome. What they are is seed pods from a plant in Australia. You see all these holes in it. What my understanding is that there's a stalk end, and it sits up on a stalk. If you look at it from the sideways, it sits up on a stalk like this, and as it waves in the wind, the seeds are in these holes, and they're maturing over time. And I think it takes a while. I'm not sure it's really an annual thing. It may be longer than that, but the seeds will mature, and then these holes will open up, and as it waves in the wind, these seeds will be worked out onto the ground. And just like seeds everywhere, they're picked up by birds and animals and so forth and carried about in order to propagate the plant. So people go out and harvest these seed pods from the Banksia plant. And apparently there are lots and lots of Banksia plants, trees, shrubs, and so forth. And they come in various sizes. Look at the difference in size of these two. So, you know, they're wonderful. They're really cool. And I'll show you as we go. The outside of this, I wish you could all be here to touch these. So I know some of you have tried them. Some of you have bought them. I looked in a catalog, and it looks like they run about $10 to about $15 each. I happened to pick up a whole bag of them at an AAW symposium one time, and these are some of the few that are remaining from that. Here's an interesting aspect of them. I know you can't feel it, but you can see it. Whereas this one, some of the hard, horny outer shell is missing here, and you can see this darker red area. It's like velvet. It feels like velvet touching it. It's really neat. And to find a soft velvet layer just under this hard outer shell is quite interesting. Now, sometimes you find these things in different sizes, you find them in different shapes. I have one here. I have one here that Judy and I picked up some years ago. Actually, I picked it up, I guess, and it looks like a hedgehog. So, you know, we actually had a pet hedgehog one time, and when we saw this one, we thought, holy smokes, that looks for all the world like Brillo, our hedgehog. So I flattened the bottom so it will sit flat and upright, and there's Brillo the hedgehog in a Banksia pod. So that's they're fun to use. They're really neat. The cool thing about Banksia pods, and the reason to use them, is because of these holes. So and you do hollowing with them. So as you hollow, and you'll see that as you hollow out, you're getting more and more inside. Sorry, it was buried deeper than I thought, but this is a piece I want to show you. This is a cross section of a Banksia pod, and you can see it's pretty solid on the inside. In the middle, you can see this kind of reddish velvet layer, and here are a couple of the seed holes that go in almost to the center. So the neat thing about a Banksia pod is when you hollow it out, then you're hollowing up into these holes, and the whole thing then you can see into it and through it. So we'll press on. I'll show you how that works.
Tom, how hard are those?
They are solid. They are really hard. The outer shell is very hard. The inner part is also hard. And you'll see as I start cutting on it that you don't get shavings. This is not like turning wood. We don't get any shavings at all it's all mostly dust. Now, when I turn a Banksia pod, this one, for example, I went to the bandsaw and cut off this end and cut off this end flat so that and then put a little hole right in the center of the core on both ends so that as I mount this on the lathe, it holds very nicely. And I have a steb center on the drive side of this rather than a spur drive. What I've found, as hard as these things are, this steb center, the little tiny teeth in the steb center, did you see that before I tightened it up? The steb center, these little teeth bite into the wood better. There's a center point in this which is spring loaded. So as I tighten this up, as you can see this, as it tightens up into that steb center, that center point is pressed in to get to the teeth, and the teeth bite into the wood. So rather than a broad, tooth, 4 broad teeth on a regular spur drive, what we have is a whole bunch of little teeth. Actually, I've never counted them. I don't know how many teeth there are in one of those, but I've never counted them. So I want to be able to, my plan this morning for this piece is to do a base, then with a kind of a mushroom cap over the top of it like this. So I'm going to cut this, I'm going to cut a tenon on the end, on each end of this. And then once I get the tenon cut, then I'll probably just go to the bandsaw and cut off this part. And I'll show you how I'm going to size that in a moment. So the first part here is to just, trim this down into a tenon. Okay, so I'm going to use a bowl gouge here initially and just kind of define where I want to cut this tenon. You see, this is all dust. There's no shavings at all. I need to do a tenon on the other side. Look at all this fuzz right there. That's pretty funny. So I'll take this off now. I'm going to go to the bandsaw and cut it into 2 pieces. David Delker did a demo several months ago now, in which he showed how to make this golden mean gauge. And it's wonderful. He handed out instructions on how to do it, which of course I promptly lost. So I had to ask David for it again, and he provided it. So the 1/3, 2/3 rule is perfect for this particular gauge. And as I use this to find the dimensions, what I'm looking for is where do I want to cut this so I have 2/3 at the bottom and 1/3 at the top. And the answer is right about here, right where this particular point is. So this is my Fibonacci gauge that's, but I think that's 14 inches long. I also made one that is, I don't know if you can see this one. This is 24 inches long. So, you know, for bigger stuff. So I'll take this off. Give me a moment to go to the bandsaw and cut it. Okay, so that gives you, once again, a real good view of what the inside of this thing looks like. There's some splitting and cracking here. I don't know if that's from drying out or if that's just how it naturally grows, but you see all the kind of the rays coming in where the where all the seeds grow. We'll take that stem center out. And put on a chuck. This is a one-way stronghold chuck with the #1 size jaws in it. Of course, we'll hope that this does not fly off and crash into the screen of Ray's television, which is sitting on the fender of the big trailer that usually lives in my shop. This is the bottom. So what I want to do is shape this bottom and hollow this out. So the first thing to do is shape the outside. Face shield, bowl gouge. And you know, whenever you can, use the tailstock. So I'm not going to hollow this out yet, but what I'm going to do is bring the tailstock up so that it just gives me a little more support in there as I'm shaping this bottom. Let's take a look at it. Seeing a lot of red fuzz. Okay, so now this would be the point at which I would sand the outside of this. So I will, I'll just forego that for now and start seeing about hollowing here. Okay, can we go to the front camera, please? I want to talk about hollowing tools for just a moment. C.A. Savoy, who was our source for all that deeply discounted one-way stuff early on, and who passed away about 3 years ago, used to make these tools, and these are hollowing tools. One is straight, one is hooked at the end, and these are really terrific for little stuff like the Christmas ornaments that we all make, the hollow globe, and then the finial and the icicle at the bottom. I might use that for in here because I don't know if I can get in with some of the bigger stuff that I have. Another tool to use is this arm brace, and the tool is here, and here you see there's a curved arm, and then I have hold it, let's see, right there. There's a kind of a teardrop cutter, which is high-speed steel, and I can rotate that. I loosen this little bolt on the front of it and rotate it to, to use the narrow point or the, yeah, here we are, good. The narrow point or the fat point. When you're hollowing, you'll find that it hollows much better if you use a narrow point to hollow. It's not as grabby because you only have a little tiny narrow point. And what I use is that little narrow point, or even like a 3/16 or 1/4 inch bit that is has a round end on it like this when I'm hollowing. And then once I get it pretty close to where I want and as smooth as I can get it, then I'll take something like this, turn it around so this fat edge is the one touching the wood, and I go in really, really gently and try to cut that with the inside with the wide point, and that smooths out the ridges and everything. But it's a big wide cut, so it can get kind of grabby. So if you're doing that, that's the point where you really want to be careful that you're not putting too much force on it, or you can get a catch. Another hollowing rig is like this. Now this one has the cutting end here, and as you can see from this, it's reticulated, so it's adjustable straight in or angled as you want, and it has an outrigger on it to help counteract the force of wanting to turn it or flip it around. And then you can go even bigger, and you can get a hollowing rig which has something like this on the end of it, so that when you can put a captured device on your leg, similar to this. So you have this, and I call it a D-bar, but it goes nicely into a rig like this. And as you're moving in and out with the cutter end, it's this trap back here is preventing it from turning. So it's very, very stable. But it's a great system, and that's my favorite way of doing it. That seems to work the best. We've had some hollowing demos in the past, so those are they're just different hollowing gear. Probably at one of our show and tell times, we could probably have not show and tell, but when we get back into skill enhancement, perhaps we can have hollowing night, and people can try different hollowing equipment and see how that works. So when you hollow, the first thing to do would be to cut a hole, drill a hole in this. I'm just going to use about a Forstner bit here. Let's see there, you can see it. It's a Forstner bit. This is about a 1-inch bit. And I have a Jacobs chuck here, which I can use to tighten up, put in a tailstock, and then drill down in here. Now, before I drill, I kind of need to know how deep I want to go. So I'm going to measure this. Looks like I want to go probably about 1 7/8 inches. So 1 7/8 inches is going to be right here. I have a piece of blue tape on the Forstner bit, and I can mark on my blue tape how far I want to go. Now that I've marked that, let's measure again. 1 7/8. Nope, I was wrong. It's 2 7/8. Okay, so that goes clear back up into here, but we'll probably only have to, I can do part of it and then I'll have to extend the bit. So I'll turn the lathe on, turn the speed down a little bit, put on my face shield and drill down in. So you saw me drill all the way down in, clear in as far as it would go. I would caution you and tell you that using the a Banksia pod for that works just fine because it's nice and dry. But I did not bring it out to clear it because the bit is pulling out all that dry stuff. It's working just fine. I don't need to clear it. If you're you're doing a hollowing with dry wood, then you definitely want to clear the bit. You want to clear it because all that wet wood that you're drilling out is going to compact all around the bit, and it will be difficult to pull it out. So drill a ways, clear it, drill a ways, clear it. But with the Banksia pod, because it's so dry and it's just mostly dust, it's going to clear just fine. So I pulled the bit out a little bit farther. So I'm going to come in here once again and drill a little farther in with that bit. I want to measure once again. Ah, perfect. Stand by. Woo. Okay, so now I'll move the tailstock out of the way, move my tool rest in a little bit closer and see what I can do to clean up the inside of this a little bit. I'm going to use this hollowing tool and see if that will work. I think initially I need to open the inside up just a little bit before I can use the bigger tool. Okay, now the neat thing about doing a Banksia pod, like I said, are these holes through the sides of it. And the holes allow you to tell how thick your wood is. So I can see from looking through the holes, that's pretty thick. I don't think I want it to be quite that thick. I'm going to cut a little bit more and thin that wall down just a little bit. And then I'll continue hollowing down into the center of it. I'm going to see if the bigger hollowing rig will work in there. I'm not sure it will, but we'll see. It may be a little grabby and may even break it, but we'll see.
Tom,
Yes.
this is Steve Huffam. And a couple of times I've done a Banksia pod, I always had problems with the little hole lining coming out when I got too thin. Have you ever had that problem?
I have, and what I've found is if you treat that with a little bit of thin CA glue before you get that thin, that will help hold them in.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
You're talking about these little holes right here, this circle around the seed hole.
Yeah, if you get too thin, and maybe I'm too aggressive or something, but they were starting to come out. I was having to glue them back in if I could find them.
Yeah, I know. How many times have all of us grubbed around on the floor in the shavings trying to find a piece of bark or something like that that's flown off our piece and glue it back on. I tell people if you're doing a natural edge bowl and you think the bark's going to fly off, just before it comes off, sweep up the floor. That way you don't have to grub through all those shavings and things to find it. It'll be right there. Of course, knowing when that is the trick. I don't know if this will fit in here or not. This may not work real well. I don't know. Well, it might be okay. I'll give it a try and we'll see if it looks like it's not going to work. I'll go back to the smaller tool. Okay. Now, recognizing that hollowing is not the most exciting demo to watch, I'm not going to hollow that any further. But I do want to finish it at some point for show and tell. So I will leave the tenon on it and the bottom finished, and then I'll work on the top. So I'm going to leave this. I need to sand that just a little bit, clean that up so I can fit a top on it. So I just happen to have a packet of sandpaper here. So I'll give it a light sanding just around the top. Okay, that went to That went to 150 grit. So just leave it at that. So, oh, one other thing I wanted to show you too. I have a little set of tweezers here that are very helpful for picking out some of the crud that's in these little seed holes. There are all kinds of little parts and stuff in there. You can kind of brush it out, kind of pick it out. If you find one, I'm sorry, if you find one that is that looks like it's loose, like Steve suggested, grab your CA glue and give it a dose of glue. If you do that, you know how CA glue does affect the color of the wood a little bit. Sometimes, particularly on the darker woods, if you put super glue on a crack or something, it could, and then later varnish it or put some kind of finish on it, there may still be a little bit of a CA glue shadow on that. So, you know, I found that with Banksia pods, that doesn't really seem to be the case. It seems to work all right. It seems to blends in all right. You'll see the super glue, but then when you put your finish on, it just kind of disguises it. So there's our piece right now. So I can take that off. This is an interesting spot here. There's fuzz there, so that's an indentation in the piece. So I'll have to figure out how I'm going to deal with that. But hopefully we'll all find out by next show and tell, next month's meeting, what we're going to do. So here you can see down inside. Yeah, thanks. You can see where I drilled out the hole in the center, and then I'm hollowing from that hole out to the sides. So this is now, it's not a 1/4 inch thick, it's probably 3/16 inch thick, which is starting to get thin for a Banksia pod. But I think it'll go a little bit farther. I think about 1/8 of an inch, maybe about as far as you want to go. But I think that'll be okay. Let's stop there. Once again, I point out all of this crud on the lathe. All this is dust. There are no shavings here at all. It's all dust. Let's set that aside.
You can take a lighter and burn that last remaining little fuzz off of there.
What was that?
Use a lighter and burn the last remaining fuzz off.
Oh, I don't know. I haven't tried to do that.
Apparently he has.
Oh, did it work?
Yes, it did.
Okay. Did the whole thing burn up, or did did it go out when you wanted
No,
it to?
I mean, you don't use a blowtorch on it. You just use a little lighter to kind
Oh,
of
I see.
fan it, you know.
Actually, I kind of like the fuzz. And so when I have done these in the past, if I've had a patch of fuzz like that, that is very visible, I'll go ahead and put my finish over it. It's going to harden it, so it's not going to be fuzzy. It's not going to feel like velvet unless it's a big enough patch that I can work around it and not fuzz it or not get it wet with my finish. But you know, that's kind of a neat effect if you can leave it soft and velvety. Okay, so I'm going to hollow this out a little bit, and then I'm going to see if I can figure out the size I want to make, and I want to put in just a little shelf in there that will fit down on top of my the base of it. So first, hollowing. Okay, as you can see, I'm a little high, and you can move that down. Now, because the outside of this is very uneven, you need to stop and take a look at it from time to time to see where you stand. So, I want to go ahead and continue my cutting clear out to the edge. So when I finish, there may be just a little unevenness around the edge, which is desirable, I think. But I just stop to see, for both of us to see where it stands right now. So I'll move the tool wrist in just a bit, a little closer, and continue. Okay. Got some pieces that broke off because what was still holding them to the main body as I was turning became too thin and they couldn't stay there. But I'm going to make that, I want to make that a little deeper now. So I'm going to go up in a little farther. You have to be careful and be aware of the size of your base. You want to be able to get the base up inside there. Let me show you what I mean real quick. So this has got to be able to go up inside that and fit all right. If you make this too arched inside, then it may not fit quite right. So I think I'll make that a little more arched inside before I finish the outside. Here's a partial eye that I lost. Were I doing this without your help, I would probably see if I could figure out where that came from and consider gluing it back on, but I'll not do that today. So I think I'm going to go ahead and measure this and see about fitting it together. So what I want to do is measure the top. I've got some calipers here and I'll measure this top so I know what the size of that outer diameter will be. And I want to lock that in and then see if I can go in here and just mark where that will be. Now, when I do this, there's a good way to do this and a bad way to do this. So I'm going to bring this one tooth here in so that I can, as I mark it, it's way too far in toward the center. But then I can gradually work out a little bit until I have a mark where both sides fit right inside my mark or just a little short of it, so that as I do this, I know I have a guide of how far I want to cut for this little shelf to fit down onside the base. It looks like that second cut was just a little bit, looks like the first cut was about where it's supposed to be. The second cut was too far. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and use that first cut, and then I'll adjust the second one on the fly in a little bit. So in order to cut this for that little shelf, I'm going to use my parting tool, my standard go-to 1/8 inch parting tool. my 3/8 inch bowl gouge and my 1/8 inch party tool are my two most used tools. So let's see how this works. Good. I want my first cut to be too small, and then I can sneak up on it and get it where I want it. So I'm going to cut a little bit more. Cut a little bit more, stop again, test fit, and that's just about where I want it. Now this is sloped, okay? You can see, there we are. So you can see how this is curved. So I'm going to curve this cut in here so that it fits down on top of that curved bottom part. One more cut. So that's right where I want it. Now, rather than leave this center part here kind of flat and not doing much, I'm going to hollow that out a little more, but leave the outside edge here on the inside of my cut so it'll fit down on top of the base. So that should work just fine. I would normally stop here, clean up these eyes, clean some of the crud out of the eyes and so forth. Once again, just because it's fun to do, I'll test fit that up in there. It still works fine. But now I need to shape this top because the top here really needs to, yeah, good. The top really needs to have more of a mushroom look about it. I want to leave it thick enough with the edge thick here so that we can see it, but I also am a little concerned about some of these eyes, and if I cut too thin, they may fly apart. So let's see if I can adjust that a little bit. Once again, like the base, I'm going to leave that kind of I want to leave it a little bit thick, and then as I trim this, I can come in quite a ways. But I'm going to leave the tenon on the top once again so that later on I'll be able to put this back on the lathe and actually finish both parts. But I think you'll get the idea. So let's do a little bit more trimming on the top. Oh, what's the first rule? What's the first rule? When you adjust the tool rest, you have to turn the lathe by hand to be sure that it misses the wood. And I didn't do that. Boy, oh boy, good lesson for all of us. Always, when you stop the lathe, you adjust the tool rest, you spin the piece by hand, and then you can turn it on and continue turning. Like my wife says, do as I say, not as I do. Okay, got it. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Ray just pointed out that I was leaning too far out. So again, sorry.
Just at the
Thank
very
you.
end.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I want to make that a little thinner. So I'm going to cut in just a little bit more on this and see if I can thin that down just a little bit. Okay, I think you can see with the, you can see the banjo through some of these eyes. So that's the effect you're trying to get. You want to make this thin enough that you can have cut through the eyes and you can see. That's still too thick, but I may refine that a little bit more later. The other thing is to use a depth gauge to see how far in you've come here. Now these, I sell these depth gauges. If you come to Skill Enhancement, you know that I sell these specialized depth gauges for $10 a piece, highly specialized. They have a special rubber tip on the end so you don't mar your piece. And you can come in here and, you know, put your thumb across where both sides are, raise it up, put your thumb in the same place, and you can kind of see where the top is and how deep you've gone. So I don't want to go any deeper there. I'm going to leave it right there. That turned out to be just right. So rather than cut this off, I'm going to leave it as is on the tenon so that I can put it back on and finish it later. But let's pull it off and take a look at where it stands for a moment. Okay, so here is the base. And picture this, having finished up cutting the base and flattening it out, parting that off. The whole thing is sanded, all the eyes are all cleaned out. And then the top, likewise, the top has a nice, I like to leave this hard, horny edge all the way around it. It does display a little bit of the fuzz, both inside and outside, but then I will finish that off and shape that. So ultimately, it'll be a little mushroom box like this. So it's completely unfinished, as you can see, but I'm sure you get the idea. So that concludes that part of it. My initial thought was I would like to do a finial on a hollow form, but rather than do that and put you back through the paces of cutting a piece, turning it, and making a little hollow form, let me do it on the on a whiteboard here. That may be easier. I'll get
Hey,
this.
Tom.
Yes.
Tom, it's Peter. Before you start that, would you mind commenting on how you would approach finishing the end of the ends of your pieces, how you might chuck them? Because I can imagine that your vacuum chuck isn't going to work very well in these situations, and a jam chuck may be the approach to take. But because the edges, particularly of the cap of your mushroom, are not going to be finished smooth, using coal jaws might also be a problem. So how would you approach finishing the bottoms of those?
Good question, Peter. Thank you for bringing it up. I might have missed that later on, but the way I would finish off the bottoms on the base here, I would trim this down a little bit more, probably not a lot more. I think I'd want the bottom to be fatter. Here, I'll hold it in this direction. I think I want the bottom to be a little wider than this tenon is, but I would continue this curve down. Can we go to the overhead camera a minute? That might be easier. I would continue this curve down and in a little bit more, take this flare off, and then I can, I would part it off. Once it's parted off, and sand all of this before I take it off. Sand all of this, nice and smooth, and then, part this off, and then probably hand sand it. By hand sanding, I'm talking about a couple of different methods. One is using a power sander and sanding the bottom of it like this while I'm holding it. That seems to work very well. Because it's so small, I might put the 2-inch mandrel on rather than the 3-inch mandrel on my sander. So that may be a little bit too big for the base. It depends on how far it ends up, how big it is, and how I think it would best be approached. But I would do kind of the same thing with the top, Peter. I would, when I put this back on and I finish this the way I want it and the thickness I want, then I will use this tenon to hold it once again in the chuck. And I've got a lot of extra wood here, so I'll continue that curve up and shape it in some manner, and ultimately take it off altogether in order to get to the top. That would leave me with probably a little knob of some kind on the top. So once I get that knob, get it parted off and a little knob on the top, then I can take that power sander and just feather it around and clean off that knob and have it nice and smooth.
Thanks, Tom.
Now, here it is. These little Banksia pods are ideal for a small vase type piece. And let me go to the board. Okay, so I have the Banksia pod here, and what I would probably do would be to cut it so it's about this shape. Nice flat bottom. I like to kind of concave the bottom. I don't like flat bottoms, but I would probably do a little concave bottom on that. And then up here, I would cut just a little tiny shelf in here. So this comes down and leaves a little, just a little shelf. Can you see what I'm doing here? So I have just a little flat shelf inside of that. And then I would use, in fact, I got out a piece to use that today, a piece of African blackwood. So what I might do would be to cut a piece here that has a little base like this, then maybe with a little tulip shape, cut in and back out, and then do a long tapered finial. Kind of hard to tell with the this big fat marker, but something like this. This down here would be my base, and I would like to turn that up in there just a little bit. When I do that, I have the headstock of the lathe here, the drive here, and I would put probably my pin jaws, my number 1 jaws on the chuck. And the jaws would be like this. With my block of wood in here, held in the number 1 jaws. So I'm going to have this piece of wood in here held in those number 1 jaws. And then initially, I would bring the tailstock up against that just to help stabilize it. And I would cut this down quite a bit to thin it down, just take some of the wood off of it to turn a little finial for that. And then once I have that done, I'll take the tailstock away and then finish up my end here. So I'm going to, as you do a finial, you want to finish up this little top end of it, maybe do an inch or so, and then sand it out there. And then come back, do the next part of it, and sand that, and then do the next part, and kind of sanding it as you go so that you're not putting a lot of pressure on this long, real skinny part here. You finish that before you get down here. And by finished, I mean finished. You can even put a little friction polish on it as you go, and so forth. You can get, but you get it all sanded, you get it polished up, you put your finish on it. If you're using a friction polish, that's just fine. And then work your way back. Now, of course, in my picture here, this is completely wrong because I have it up inside the jaws, which is not going to happen. I'm going to have to stop out here somewhere to cut it off. So I'm going to have my finial out here and part it off outside the jaws, of course. But measuring this part right there, the width of that is very important, because when you measured this space right here inside your little vase, and you want this little end, this fat end, to fit right down inside that. So you do have to be a little cautious as you're doing that. Cut a little, stop, measure, cut a little, stop, measure, sneak up on it. if you don't sneak up on it, it's pretty easy to overshoot it. And if you overshoot it, then you have two choices. You can, it'll be real nice and loose and easy to take off, or you can go get another piece of wood and try again. Your choice entirely. But rather than take the time now, it's 11:30 already. I don't think I want to take the time to turn this finial. We can do that another time. We can do finials. Finials are fun. As Steve pointed out, doing that tall, skinny vase with that long thin stem, you got to pay attention, and you do it with an easy touch and manage how thin that is as you cut. Otherwise, you can pretty easily break it off, and of course, that's not what we want to do. Any questions about any of this I can better explain at this point? No questions. All right. Well, thank you very much. Peter, back to you.